I was kinda swamped this month. A lot of stuff going on for me in October, so I only got 6 games on this list. 5 of them were good, 1 of them was really bad. Here's the scoring system I'm using, let's get into it. I started this month off with a little bit of Risk of Rain 2. I promised myself that I wouldn't play this game again because it sapped the life out of me the first time around because I kept getting one shot at the end of whatever challenge I was working towards over and over and over again, wasting hours of my life. So for a year and a half, I looked at this game with utter contempt. And then I saw my brother playing it recently and I thought, damn it, I forgot how fun this game looks. Let's run it back, I guess. I haven't played it all that much this month, but I'm already remembering why I loved it so much before it broke my heart. This game is not afraid to get absolutely insane. You can stack defensive or offensive perks dozens of times over. There's also some strategy and risk and reward that comes from everything from deciding when to print items at the cost of something random in your inventory, all the way to how long you should stay in a certain level before you get out of there because the difficulty ramps up with time. This isn't the roguelike with the best story or the best art or the best level design, bosses, weapons, anything like that, but it's one of the most ludicrously fun games I've ever played despite that once you get a handle on the basics. If you're looking for a game that's just a pure good time, you'll find that in spades here, 4 out of 5. Now I'm gonna say something very controversial. God of War 2018 is a pretty good game. Everybody and their grandmother knows that God of War Ragnarok is coming out in a bit over a week, and in preparation I played the first game, or I guess like the 4th game technically, which I hadn't played in nearly 4 years. I could talk about the incredible story, the combat that focuses on special moves and combos in a way that places it as a nice blend of Souls and DMC, the writing, the visuals, the 2 good bosses. Okay, so maybe that's not the strongest suit of the game, but really you know that stuff already. But as somebody who came back to this game after so long, what surprised me the most is how much side content it has. I don't remember why, but my first time playing this, I completely mainlined it. I didn't spend too long on the side stuff, and so this time around I was like, wait, there's dragons you can free? There's combat trials, there's a roguelike section, there's a Valkyrie mommy that steps on me every time I die? I had heard some of this over the last few years just hearing people talk about the game, but I never actually went and did it myself until now, and while I'll admit that some of the side stuff isn't up to snuff, the platinum for this game is a little bit painful having to run through Niflheim like 50 times just to collect resources. I gotta give props to how different most of the side content is from each other. Obviously a lot of combat and some puzzling is involved in most of it, but there's a lot of ideas that feel very unique and you wouldn't expect it as side content for a game like this. I mean, 2 of the realms are entirely optional challenges and there's some cool moments, interiors, and set pieces that are tied to character quests. I just thought I'd talk a bit about that side of things because the rest of the game everyone already knows is good, you don't need me to convince you, but this replay actually got me to appreciate it on a greater scale. 5 out of 5, this is an easy recommendation for anyone with any interest in action-adventure games. Look, I know what you're thinking, an interlude already after 2 games? Yeah, I told you, it's not a long list this time, but I did spend a good chunk of time this month with non-gaming related media. I got really big into Batman this month, so this interlude is just the Batman related stuff that I consumed, starting with Scott Snyder's New 52 comic run, and this is so damn good. I've heard some people say that Snyder doesn't have a lot of emotion in his writing, and it's more about the plot and the sequence of events over characters, and I can see that being a big problem for some people, but honestly, I just loved how tense and tightly crafted his stories are. I've read about half of this run so far, which includes the Court of Owls arc, the Death of the Family arc, and the 0 Year arc, and the latter was my least favorite, but it still had some great moments, and I like the concepts that it put out there. 0 Year definitely had a clear inspiration on the plot of this year's The Batman, and the 2 previous arcs are so hard to put down, I blazed through them both. Death of the Family does end a bit flat, but it's not enough to ruin the story. I feel like throughout Snyder's work you get a lot of moments where Batman is really on the ropes, and it feels like he has to use every ounce of his willpower, brain power, and power to come out on top. And best of all, it's a good starting point for beginners, so if you ever wanted to get into Batman comics, get the DC Infinite app and just start up this bad boy, it's amazing. I also watched Batman vs. Robin, which is the animated movie that sort of combined events from the Court of Owls story and a later arc called Robin War, and this was one of the better Batman animated movies that I've seen. I think some of them have a bad tendency to feel like a one-to-one lifeless rehash of the comic story, and others have taken very strange creative liberties with beloved stories, so seeing an animated Batman movie that respects the source material but doesn't stick to it like glue is kinda rare. It's a pretty quick watch, and it does the Court of Owls better than the 20-hour game that they were supposed to headline. Just you wait until we get to that piece of garbage, by the way. And last but not least, this isn't directly Batman, but it's related. I watched the newest season of Harley Quinn and thought it was really good. The second season felt a little bit repetitive, and it stuck to its own drama in a way that reminded me of later seasons of some sitcoms where it's like, I feel like I've seen this before already. Didn't we already do this? And while I think the show is at its best when it has a bigger goal for the characters to encompass the whole season, and season 1 does this the best, season 3 is still able to give us a bunch of different stories and a few interesting threats and developments with a lot of of great humor. I mean, the show's as funny as ever. I'll be honest, the longer it goes on, the more I don't want Harley and Ivy together because they just seem diametrically opposed to one another and it creates a very cyclical type of drama. But I can get past that. If you want an enjoyable adult comedy with a lot of fun takes on characters and surprisingly amazing world building that I want to see more of, you should definitely check the series out. Alright, Bright Memory Infinite. The first minute or so of this game, you see about 12 shots of the main character's ass, so you know it's goated, am I right, gamers? It is so impressive that a game like this can be made predominantly by one person. It looks gorgeous, but even more impressive is being able to juggle all of these abilities and methods of killing enemies. You have a few different types of guns, they all have alt-fire modes. You can reel people in, blast them with energy, slash them with a sword, parry their blades or bullets, send them in the air, use long-range slashes, doom fist punch them, and it all works. It flows so well and creates a combat playground. The one issue that the game does have with combat specifically is that there's never any reason to switch up what you're doing aside from occasionally running out of ammo or your own interest. There's a few enemy types that you want to send upwards with your sword, but for the most part you can handle most waves or bosses just by using one weapon dry and then switching to the next. The game's also very short, it's like 2.5 hours long, and while I commend it for trying to throw in some different gameplay sections that aren't firefights, there's one where you're driving and another where you're stealthing around, those portions of the game are less meticulously crafted and tend not to stand out. It's a fast and satisfying shooter with melee accents, and it's visually brilliant, but there are definitely some aspects that make it clear you're playing a game made by a very small staff. 3 out of 5, still definitely worth it if you're itching for a quick single player shooter experience. Okay, it's time to talk about it now. Gotham Knights. God, I hate so much about this game. You guys better be ready for the full Gotham Knights review I'm making because it's gonna be a few dozen minutes of me just dunking on this game. I found very little enjoyment value here and only a couple of elements that were a net positive. There's a few decent sequences and missions that last 3 to 10 minutes each, maybe 4 or 5 of those, and a few good bosses, so in total I enjoyed, I'd guess, 40 to 50 minutes of this 20-hour long slog, and even those were laced with the basic problems this game has. The combat is slow and unsatisfying unless you play as Robin, he's the only character who feels half decent to play, and the traversal is some of the worst I've ever seen in a superhero game. 4 times! All 4 of these traversal methods suck garbage, including the one that's just a rehash of Arkham's traversal. How is it that this somehow regressed even though this studio made Arkham Origins? The grapple is less satisfying, and the physics on the cape are so wonky, it'll just randomly decide not to shoot you up after a nosedive and just have you keep descending for some reason. Like, this part was literally already figured out for you. How do you still screw it up? Not to mention the story had one decent stretch, but it ends with a dud, with the Court of Owls being incredibly disappointing, and the game also runs like you're playing it on a Texas Instruments TI-36X Pro graphing calculator. The optimization is horrible. This Gotham Knights video might honestly end up being the meanest thing I've made yet. I have so much to say about this game, but for now, it avoids a 1 because I know it managed to find a fan base and there were a few short, enjoyable stretches, so here, just take this 2 and get out of my sight. Intergalactic was good, but I was just the tiniest bit disappointed with it. Maybe it was because of the expectations that were set online and from my brother, but either way, I thought that it was a good movie with flashes of brilliance, but it didn't engage me all the way through. You'll probably notice that it's got a very similar style to Into the Spider-Verse, which is a big bonus, and in most ways this art is great, and the moments where the movie switches to a different aesthetic are real highlights, especially this predominantly black and white Mr. Rager sequence, but in slower moments where the characters are talking, I found that it had this stuttery claymation feel that clashed with the more fluid action stuff and threw me off a bit. It also had a very by-the-books plot. It's an adult animated rom-com that takes itself seriously, so that's not exactly an overstuffed genre by any means, but the actual sequence of events and what the characters go through is very paint by numbers. I don't want to spoil it, obviously, but just think of any rom-com that's ever existed, and yeah, this is basically the same thing. I love me some Kid Cudi. I think this is a really great expansion of him and his music, and I would recommend watching it, but it's really carried by its animation, I'll say. I also rewatched The Good Place this month, and every time I watch it, I'm impressed with the concept of the show. It is a sitcom, but it also has great world building and such an off-the-wall premise in contrast to other shows like it. It constantly inverts character development and relationships in a really clever way that sometimes feels a little bit repetitive given the trajectory of some seasons, but the balls to pull off straight-up character resets and make it make sense canonically is admirable for a show that's part of one of the safest genres out there. It's not the funniest sitcom I've seen, but I think it could be very indicative of where this style of show is going to go in the future. And last up for this interlude section is Werewolf by Night. This was a special Marvel presentation from this year, and I think it's one of the better projects from Phase 4. Based on the potential Silver Surfer special that's been rumored, and the Guardian special, plus all of these shows on top of the movies, it feels like the MCU is really trying to emulate comics now, with side stories and one-offs and deep-cut characters, and while there's plenty of reason for caution with that model, I mean, let's be real, if the comics industry was a person, he'd look like this. It has been through some shit. For the time being, I like that we can have smaller, less connected specials that don't have the same weight as the movies. This went by really fast. It has some fun camera work, especially for Michael Giacchino's first directorial stint. It was a little bit hokey, but in a good way, and it's just a fun little story on Disney+. I can't wait to see more of these special presentations. Okay, let's wind down with the last 2 games on the list. Dandara Trials of Fear really took me by surprise. I was expecting a good game, but this is a must-play for Metroidvania fans. It finds a way to have a very unique gameplay loop without feeling like a gimmick. You can't move around with the left stick, instead you can only jump from point to point, so you get through rooms by just pinballing through these platforms. Enemies are a bit scarce, but their existence forces you to not rush out like an idiot, and you need to find the right moment to reposition yourself to dodge attacks when more of them are on screen. Combat is simple, but it's in the stellar puzzle design and progression where Dandara shines. The winding map and the small moments where you need to figure out how to use angles to move on through are intuitive and fit the overall feeling of cautious momentum that this game exudes through its traversal. The speed of backtracking really helps remove the monotony that sometimes felt with Metroidvanias, although I did notice that sometimes the paths that I couldn't travel through yet would be a little long, and I'd have to go pretty far back to find an alternate route that might have what I needed. I still think the ability to zip through rooms makes up for it, but it would have been nice to be able to travel between save points. I had a really great time with it. I feel like it'll appeal to a lot of different types of players, and honestly, on the scale that I'm using, I'm having a hard time justifying not giving this a 5. I would recommend this game to a lot of people, so screw it. 5 out of 5 for Dandara. And the last game on this list is another unique concept that has brilliant execution, Minit. As the name implies, you basically play this game a minute at a time. You start in your safe house, you have 60 seconds to do stuff, and then you die and get sent back. Your progress does save, so anything you collect in that minute or any paths you open up will stay that way. And there's a few different safe houses, which means that the game is more than just a 60-second walk in every direction. Minit is very simple in its adventure puzzle design. There's some deeper secrets, but it never gets too complicated to understand how to move forward. And its 60-second time limit forces you to really make the most out of your time in the game. It could have been really easy for this idea to be better in theory than in practice, but I think they made just the right amount of pathways, locked sections, and items to maintain a good balance between simple and engaging. 4 out of 5. If you like shorter games that have fresh ideas, give it a go, especially if it's on sale. I bought it for like $2. That's everything I played in October. I'm very excited for November with God of War, Evil West, and Bayonetta 3 among other things. Technically, I'm already playing Bayonetta, but I didn't have enough time with it yet to write anything substantial. Let me know what you guys played. I always love hearing it. Remember to check out the Discord if you're new. Also subscribe, leave a like, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.